I got a chance to play the Battleborn Beta over the last few days. To summarize my experience, is it a bad game? No. Is it a good game? No. However, it is somewhat unique, if nothing else. The core issue with Battleborn is, despite a somewhat interesting combination of ideas, the game doesn't really seem to understand why those ideas work in the games they come from. This is something Battleborn has in common with Gearbox's established series, Borderlands. I could make another whole video about Borderlands, so I'm not going to get sidetracked on that. In the same way, Battleborn feels as if it has mechanics just to have them, rather than the mechanics interacting in an interesting, strategic, or thematic way. A fun way, perhaps, but adding gameplay elements purely because of fun or cool factor can lead to a very sloppy feeling game mechanically. The buildables really encapsulate this issue. Battleborn has a system wherein there's a resource called shards. Shards can be acquired in a couple ways. Primarily, shards appear in side areas of the maps further from the objectives, where they emerge out of the ground in varying sizes at predetermined locations. Shards can be used to either activate your equipment, more on that later, or on buildables, which include turrets, which shoot at enemies, accelerators, which speed up both players and minions, healing nodes to recover health, and even large minions to add to your lane's wave. Each team starts with some pre-built turrets on their side of the map, but there are also bases which predetermined buildables may be placed. If you played Monday Night Combat, the original, not the free-to-play game that killed the IP, this may sound somewhat familiar. This makes perfect sense on paper. In a game with MOBA-style minions, giving the player more control over the wave should create more strategic variety, right? Well, not really. Any character can take a moment and destroy a tower, even one that's fully upgraded, which is rather odd when you spend close to the amount of activating all your equipment only to have the turret destroyed in 20 to 30 seconds. Compounding all of this is how little the buildables do. Turrets do little enough damage that it's very easy to fight while they shoot at you. The rocket turrets and the accelerators have more of an impact, but not significantly more health. More so, what keeps these particular buildings from being effective is how easy it is to outrange them, and more so how far away you can get angles on them. At best, you could slow a wave of minions or a player. This results in towers which don't give you any control of the area they're placed, because even though a skilled player could easily destroy a turret without taking many hits, even squishier characters can simply tank the damage. So I'm left wondering if a buildable only gives your minions a slight advantage in lane, can be destroyed by any enemy player that happens to be around, and can be avoided in a fight, why bother investing shards in it? This is exacerbated by the small maps, which make it very easy for a roaming or long-range character to destroy them with or without a babysitter. Compare that to a tower in a traditional MOBA, which can kill a character in a few hits. The large minions that can be bought with shards seem to have the most effect, but on the other hand, they have such a long cooldown and high cost that it's something even a losing team with little to no buildables up can keep on top of. The generally easily dealt with nature and expense of the buildables beg the question, why implement this mechanic at all? The answer feels like, just to resemble games in one of the genres Battleborn is attempting to hybridize. The resource system in and of itself is odd. As I mentioned, other than the buildables, equipment is the only other thing to spend shards on. The way it works is you purchase boxes with in-game currency that you open for randomly generated items. Said items seem straight out of Borderlands, they even have the same color code for rarity. You equip these items outside of matches and then spend shards to activate them during a game. The idea that items in Battleborn were randomly generated was wholly irksome at first glance, as it would be a pretty big area for imbalance to arise. But as it turns out, the equipment does very little, and you can only bring 3 items to begin with. In a game where characters having 1,000 or more health is pretty normal, 5 hit points regenerated a second doesn't do much. Neither does 10% move speed, or 8% more damage on skills either. Not to mention these items can have drawbacks on them as well. So again, I can't help but feel equipment is only in the game because it's something that's in MOBAs, rather than actually being a relevant or fun mechanic. That isn't to say that the items do nothing, but the effect is small enough that there isn't room to have a game-changing item like in a traditional MOBA. Of course, if that was the case, then veteran players with the most items to choose from would have a huge advantage over new players. So having items that give significant effects would not be balanced even if they were available in this system. Especially considering items don't become available until you get a couple of account levels. This, in addition to the buildables, makes shards feel pretty unimportant. In one of the modes, it isn't even strange to end up in a situation where there isn't anything you can spend shards on available. Ignoring the questionable design decisions that I've brought up, and many more that I haven't, the real core of what makes Battleborn mediocre is its characters. The characters, or Battleborn as the game calls them, Aesthetically are great. Barring some occasional cringy humor, the visual and audio representation of the Battleborn are pretty good and varied to boot. On the flip side, mechanically, well, they're okay. There are some interesting characters that play with the recharging shields most Battleborn have, as well as some other interesting mechanics, but they all feel as though the developers didn't want to give a single one any major weakness. Which doesn't sound strange, but when you consider the only way to balance a character with a really strong or unique set of abilities is to give them large drawbacks, it leads to a roster of characters that can be somewhat samey in what they do. Although how they do it can vary somewhat. That's not to say that they didn't give the Battleborn weaknesses, more so that the weaknesses tend to be minor or amount to lacking in a specific area of versatility. Another aspect of the heroes is that the harder it is to land an ability or attack, the more damage it does. Heroes with, or at least feel like they have, hitscan weapons seem to do less damage than melee heroes and heroes with slow projectiles. This makes sense, but makes the heroes that are harder to use seem plain better in play at higher skill levels. There are some number balancing issues where heroes do a little too much damage with certain skills and some seem to not do enough damage, but there doesn't seem to be any huge balancing issues. My take on Battleborn's balance is conjecture on my part, as talking about the minutiae of balance in a game that hasn't been released is going to be educated guessing at best. On the other hand, there are some odd issues with the roster. Out of 25 characters, only 3 are support as far as I can tell, and only one of those 3 can restore health. In casual play, these kinds of balance issues are fine. The balance in the context of high-level play seems poor. However, it doesn't seem like Gearbox is going for competitive balance, and in terms of being able to pick up the game and play casually with strangers, it's fine. Something Battleborn does well is how it handles the acquisition of characters and items to a lesser degree. You buy Battleborn, and you have access to everything. Eventually. You start with a small roster of heroes and unlock more. To make any given character available, you can either reach a certain account level, or complete a specific challenge. This is clever for a couple of reasons. The obvious one is it gives the game some progression, but the other and more important is that since the starter characters are the same for everyone, you're introduced to the roster slowly. The items are acquired through currency you get after every match. While this may sound like a pretty standard free-to-play model, in Battleborn it moves very quickly. There are still some large time investments available, as unlocking cosmetics for characters and their lore takes much longer. This ends up resembling free-to-play progression, but much less tedious, which is refreshing. Although pricing the game at $60 when you're competing with many games that are free-to-play is a bit strange, they do not have any microtransactions. To me personally, for what you get, $60 is a bit high regardless. Overall, not a bad game, but not one to dump 1,000 hours into either. Certainly an acceptable choice to pick up and play with some friends, but not one with a lasting appeal to maintain a large community. If you liked this video, or hated it, let me know. I'll leave how up to you. That's all I got for now, so have a good one.